Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Talbert, and welcome to The Awakening. This afternoon, we have some very interesting guests with us. They are a married couple, doctors and Dr. Sedlacek. They are from Buchanan, Michigan, and they have been married for, make sure I get this right, 35 years. I am very excited to have them here with me this afternoon. Dr. Sedlacek, welcome to The Awakening.
Thank you. Thank you. So glad to be here.
Okay, actually, it's very interesting how you came to be on this show. I've read an article by Dr. Sedlacek, the husband, and I had never read or heard anyone talk about mental health from the Bible the way that you did in your article. I had never read where anyone went back to Genesis and you went throughout the Bible. You took the theme of mental health throughout the Bible. And I had never heard that or seen that. And so I was intrigued and I was amazed, especially because I had just been finding out that some people that I knew that maybe had known a lot of my life, that they actually struggled with mental health issues. And I didn't even know that's why they would maybe come and go, disappear, whatever. I didn't know what was going on. And so I was just, I guess, beginning to learn. And when I read that article, I thought, wow, this is something else. I have to interview him. People have to hear what the Lord gave him to write in that article, because I had also read that during the pandemic that a massive amount of people, more than ever, were actually having and experiencing mental health issues. And so I said, I have to reach out to him. I actually have to get him. I have to interview him. And then I've read that you were married, and I've heard about your wife. I actually spoke to you both, and I thought, both of them, I have to get them both on the show, because you actually have a ministry. You're going to tell us about, your some things from the past and present, but you actually work individually and also jointly. You work with the Family Life Ministry, mental health counseling, couples, premarital counseling, and also postmarital counseling as well. And so you are going to just share with us, and you're going to tell us all about that. And so we're going to begin. And we're going to start with the first question that we have, okay? Now, you are both jointly involved and individually involved in presenting seminars and in counseling. Would you please share your stories as to how you became both prominent, how you both became prominent in ministry in the mental health field?
Cynthia, thank you. I would like to invite you to call us David and Beverly. We're very, very comfortable just being us. To me, I appreciate people using professional appellations, but they divide somewhat. We're just regular people, and so our story. Oh goodness. I started working in the field of addiction recovery back in 1972. And so I've been at it almost 50 years now. And that was long before I met Beverly. And so a part of the journey for us has been the professional journey. For example, I've worked in the field of addiction as director of a detox center and director of a inpatient residential treatment program for addiction recovery, and in aftercare and outpatient facilities. And I've done about everything you can imagine in the field of addiction, including teaching and in schools of social work and in medical schools and so forth. And so that's kind of the professional side of that, before I met Beverly. And then after we met, we went into our own self-supporting ministry, where God taught us a great deal of how to integrate what we had learned professionally into the Bible. How to integrate those two, because a lot of times we want to disconnect those two.
Yes.
I think we lose a great deal in disconnecting the two rather than integrating the two. And so after we got married, we had our own ministry for a while, our own clinic where people would come from all over the country, and we would minister to them using health principles and so forth. And then we were called out to spend some time at Weimar Institute, and we developed, in addition to the New Start program, ours was called New Start Destiny, where we worked with clients who came for their health, but they also had an addiction or a mental health problem. And so we were there doing that for a while. And then, God took us down to Oakwood University, and I taught in the social work department at Oakwood because professionally, I am a social worker, by profession. So I taught there. And then God brought us up here to Andrews University, and I got recruited into the seminary and developed a dual degree program for MDiv students, Master of Divinity students who are called to be pastors, and MSW, social workers, because so many pastors are asked to do counseling, but they're not really well equipped to do counseling. So we married those two degrees together so that those who chose to could also get a master's degree in social work and learn counseling skills and community development skills and all the skills that are needed to be successful in a larger context than simply, with the local church. So that's kind of a real quick snapshot of my journey. And sweetie?
My journey has been a little different. I have been a psychiatric nurse for a number of years. When I went back to graduate school, and in graduate school, I knew I wanted to do counseling. And in graduate school is where I met David, and my life took a hard left turn. And I really wanted, I had no idea we were going into ministry, but God ended up making it clear that that's what he was doing. And as David mentioned, we learned so much about how to work with people. We had learned some really valuable skills professionally, and now God had taken us and helped us to really wed the two. My passion was the sanctuary. I loved the sanctuary, and God showed us to use the sanctuary to walk people through a healing journey. And that really transformed us and really helped us to use our professional skills to help people. And as David said, so many people want to say, I'm a counselor, and then throw the Bible in it, into the counseling experience. But what God showed us how to do is to make Christ the central focus of what we do, and then to help people to understand, not only from a biblical perspective, not just pray more and try harder, because I think we have been guilty on the other end as Christians to say, well, if you just pray more and try harder, you'll be okay. And then there are people on the professional end say, well, we don't need the Bible. We just need to help people to understand from a secular point of view. But marrying the two has really been transformative for us in our own personal healing journey. And then as we shared it with other people, all kinds of marvelous things happen. And while David was busy, wanting to, when we went to Weimar, we both developed that program at Weimar, New Start Destiny. And then when we went to Oakwood, I really didn't know what I would be doing there. And counseling had been something that I had learned to do, but also I had taught nursing for several years. And so I ended up using more of my gifts and talents in nursing, teaching nursing at the university. But I never lost my passion, and I would do counseling on the side and do women's retreats on the side. And then when we moved here to Andrews up in Michigan is where God just really has provided a wonderful opportunity where I can counsel full time, and then of course do our ministry further grow and develop. So,
wow, it's amazing. I think it's interesting how you state that oftentimes there's not a marriage of, okay, with the counseling, we do need God because he's the ultimate counselor. He's the original. The thing is, he's the one who created us. And so he is the one who understands us better than anyone else in the world. And so he knows how to get us back on track or to heal us from all that we're bombarded with in the world that we live in today. And so I think it's wonderful that you have married the two together, the word, the gospel, but also what you've learned as far as counseling techniques and methods in school and education. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. And that is what really intrigued me, I think, about your article as well. Now, the article that I'm referring to is entitled "The Gospel and Mental Health." You wrote, Dr. Setlinger, you said call you David. You said is it David? You said it's okay?
Yes, David.
Oh, I took all that time trying to learn how to pronounce your name.
Well,
now you want me to use your first name.
Cynthia, can I say something before you go to the next question that I think is really important? We shared our professional journey with you, but our story is much different than that. And I think it's important because to me, it's our story, not just our professional journey that has made us who we are. We are two broken people who have been on a journey of healing for ourselves, not just helping others, but our capacity to help others has been related to our own journey of healing ourselves. And, just really quickly in my own story, I was raised as the oldest boy of 15 children in a Catholic family in Wisconsin. So I'm a farm boy. I was raised on the farm, and I went away to study to be a priest for 7 years, and then I decided, to leave because I wanted to be married. But in my family of origin, in this large family, which had a lot of just wonderful, wonderful things about it, but a lot of brokenness also. Okay, a lot of brokenness where dad was very much in control and it had to be dad's way. And mom was she was a victim, and her life, unfortunately, was just, having babies and taking care of them. And so, and dad got into his own addiction stuff with alcohol. And so I'm identify as an adult child of an alcoholic. And Beverly is my second wife. I was married once and divorced. And with my family background, who do you think I would marry? Well, I would marry someone like my dad, because I'm number 2 child, and number 2 children often take on the characteristics of their mother and kind of identify with mom. And so I married someone who also had a history of addiction and whose addiction flared up during the course of our 12-and-a-half-year marriage. And who also did not speak to me very well, who was very controlling and demeaning, much like my father was. And after she got clean and sober, when she got clean and sober, I started going to 12-step meetings, to Al-Anon meetings. And at first I was going for her because I wanted to support her recovery. But I quickly learned that's not why you go to 12-step meetings. You go because you need it for yourself. And I certainly did. And that was the beginning of my own journey of recovery. And so I've been going to 12-step meetings now for many, many years. And our church now has developed what we call Adventist Recovery Ministries. Our church is Christ-centered 12-step program. And I've been a part of leading and training and equipping and, people from all over the world in how to do a 12-step recovery program, because I first needed my own help. And the book that Beverly and I wrote, Cleansing the Sanctuary of the Heart, really described our own journey of healing, as well as the lives of people that we worked with on that journey. So I'm still in process. Even though I'm teaching other people about the process, I still am in the process. And that, to me, that's exciting. Because Paul said, it's not as if I've already arrived,
All right,
but I am pressing forward toward the mark, and so there is the was part of it, there is the is part of it, and then there is the will be part of it. And I'm right now in the is part of it, looking forward to what will be.
And,
go ahead.
And my story is remarkably different from David's. And I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, Ohio. And I am the second child of 4. And my dad was a gambler. My mother was very codependent, trying to please him and do what would make him happy. And when I was 3, I was molested by one of her brothers. My mother comes from a family of 9, and the children, all 9 of them were addicts, alcoholics. And so as a result of that experience, it really set me up for a lot of pain. When I was 13, I met a young man who was 17, and he told me I was the best thing since sliced bread, and no one had ever paid attention to me. And as a result of that, he told me if I got, if we had sex, there would be a chance in a million that I could get pregnant the first time we had sex. And I was indeed that chance in a million. And I did get pregnant. And so at the young, tender age of 13, I was pregnant. And at 14, I had this bouncing baby boy. And I learned about the Sabbath. I always believed in the Sabbath, but nobody could explain to me why we were not going to church on Sabbath. And so it was always in the back of my mind about the Sabbath. And so there was a woman who would come over to in our neighborhood and pass out junior guides. And I was an avid reader, and I would read everything that she would bring. And as a result, I believe she sent me Voice of Prophecy lessons, but she never owned up to it. And as a result of that, when I got the lessons, they kicked you out of school back in the day. And so I was home, and I was really sad about not being in school. And I would get these lessons, and the next day I would turn around and send them off. And when I got to the Sabbath truth, I was really happy about that. And I determined that when I would have this baby, I would go to church. And so I had Eric, and I did in fact go to church. And so I went to the largest church in the conference, and nobody would believe I was the mother of this little kid, because I looked like a little kid myself. And so I, immersed myself in church experience, and I didn't have a lot of connections with the young people, but the older women took me under their wing. I wanted to go to Oakwood. My mom told me that was too far away from home to go, so I didn't go. And I went to a college in Southern Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And I got my nursing degree from that college, and went back home, and I had decided now, Eric is 8 and I'm 22. And I had decided I was going to be this doting grandmother and follow him around. I was going to get my master's and then my PhD. I loved school. That was how I defined myself. And as it turned out, I really hit this clinical depression because I hadn't addressed my own pain of my abuse and then having this baby at 14 because nobody talked to me about it. And so I was just full of pain and all of this. And God really was merciful through study of scripture. And as I mentioned, I started studying the sanctuary when I was about 24, 25 years old, and just really became I immersed myself in the sanctuary. And my depression lifted, and I had determined I wasn't going to get married. And then along came David. And then on this journey, I wanted a dark-skinned, chunky Black man, and I got this skinny white man. And so it was quite a, he had everything I wanted, it was just in the wrong package. And on the second time we went out, the Lord told me this is the one he had for me. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so I had to reevaluate based on what God was saying. And so that's how we got together. And I had no idea that we would end up. We kind of laugh and talk about this now, this country bumpkin and this inner city kid, and people like know us and they know us and scramble to, just to talk to us. It is just amazing. But God is good. He's faithful. And we've been faithful doing what he's asked us to do.
Praise God for that amazing testimony and story. And I haven't read your book yet, but when I read it, I do want you to come back and we'll discuss the book concerning is it the sanctuary of the heart? It's
Cleansing the Sanctuary of the Heart. Tools for emotional healing.
Okay, so when you can mention it at the end when you tell about the different resources that you have, but once I read it, then I will definitely have you both to come back, okay? All right, now the article that I did read, and you said to call you David, so I'll call you David, is entitled The Gospel and Mental Health. Often we think, well, what in the world does the gospel have to do with mental health? But you wrote that the origins of mental health are woven all throughout the Bible, beginning in the book of Genesis. Could you please expound on this?
In Genesis, we know God's perfect plan in Genesis was beauty and every need of the human beings, including physical and mental and relational, were perfectly met before sin. But you remember that when Adam and Eve sinned and God came searching for them, the first thing before he searched for them is they made fig leaves to do what? To cover themselves because they experienced their nakedness, and so shame came into the world that way as a result of sin. And God came looking for them. And what were they doing? They were hiding from God. Mm-hmm. And they were hiding because they were afraid. So we have fear and shame coming in there. And then what happened is when God started questioning them, they started blaming one another, of course, blaming the serpent and even indirectly blaming God. And so that was the beginning of what we call the victim-victimizer cycle. And ever since then, we as a fallen human race, have been blaming and victimizing one another. And that's really the origin, fear, shame, victimization. And then shortly after that, Adam and Eve got pregnant with Cain and Abel. And we know that Cain killed Abel. And why did he do that? Because he was bitter and resentful at God because his sacrifice was not accepted. In other words, there was something in his heart that sin had already put there, which was an anti-God. I'm going to do life on my own terms, rather than on your terms. And of course, we know that Abel was not like that. He was following God faithfully. And so that resulted in murder. And so again, that's the beginnings, if you will, of mental illness right there in the scriptures.
Right. And I think it's really important. I would also like to add the piece of judging. Adam, Eve judged God based on Satan's lies. She judged that God was not all that he said he was. Adam judged Eve, and they both judged God. And so we judge one another. And when we judge one another, we put the other person over on the other side, and they become the other, and they are opposed to us, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And in that judging, we also have this bitterness and resentment because we see them as not like us. And so even in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain judged Abel as a goody two-shoe, for example, mm-hmm. and judged God as playing favorites. And so he was angry with God. And so as a result of his judging, and his judging was inaccurate, if you please. And so all of this is taking place, not only, in terms of being manifested in behavior, but there is a lot going on in the brains of Adam and Eve, and of course their offspring. And that is the byproduct of sin, where our little chemistry has been altered. So if I am fearful, that also means my anxiety is going to go up. I have now judged that the world is not safe. God did not make this a safe environment for me, and that causes anxiety. And in my anxiety, there are things going on, neurochemistry up in my head. There are things going on in my head, in my brain. And as a result of that, I'm not seeing clearly. My emotional brain kicks my thinking brain offline. And all of that is happening internally, even before you see it manifested in my heart. So there's a lot going on here. And so when you look at the Bible story at the beginning, we read it very simplistically, in the beginning, and then Adam sinned, and Eve sinned, and she, went away from God. And she went away from Eve. And we even see that as not a good thing. And God, by the way, God left them first. God left them, right? So Eve wandered away, but God was not present with them. He had, and I think that's the ebb and flow of relationship, the coming and going in relationship. There's so much in the Genesis story that we simplistically read. And just if you could really go back and look with the premise that mental health starts in the garden, there's so much that will unlock for you.
I'd like to also add that before sin, there was perfect integration of relationship between God, Adam, and Eve. Yes. Perfect integration. There was perfect integration within each of them as individuals, and perfect integration of their relationship with one another. Yes. But what sin did and does even now is it disintegrates us. It creates disintegration between us and our relationship with God, distance between us and others in relationship, but even more importantly, an internal disintegration of myself. The disconnection that gets formed between my thinking brain and my emotional brain and my spiritual self through guilt, as a result of sin. There's this total disintegration of the self, which is really what leads to mental illness. So all of that, I think, is really important for us to understand the emotional and mental health implications of sin and the fall in the garden.
Okay, now you said it's okay to call you Beverly.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I want to make sure I'm clear. So you said when God left, are you referring to like when he left them from the worship, the evening, and then Eve went away? What do you mean when you said God left?
Okay, so it's implied that God was not, Eve was away from Adam.
Yes.
And then it says when sin occurred, God called out. He came walking and looking for them. And implied in that is that he also had left. And it wasn't a leaving as we think of leaving, okay? But I think there's this ebb and flow. If you think about this, and this is something that really I've been wrestling with. This is kind of a new thought. Sorry, David, don't mean to cut you out. When someone dies, we love them even more. I'm talking about my loved ones. I'm talking about a loved one. I'm not talking about somebody I'm mad at. Okay. I'm talking about, so we do this, part of the grief process. They're here and then they're not here. Mm-hmm. And when David leaves on his trip, for example, he goes someplace. And I'm really happy when he first goes, I got the house to myself. It's really great. And then by the end of the weekend, okay, it's time for you to come back, David. Parents have thought he's gone for a week. It's like, oh no, you've got to get back here, because I really miss him in his absence, right? I really miss him. And so my relationship with him, my heart toward him is even drawn more to him in his absence. Could it be, and I don't know the answer to this, but this is part of something that I've been thinking about. It's triggered by, some things I've been exposed to. Could it be that in God's absence, when God, and we don't know, we aren't clear, but could it be that was part of the ebb and flow of relationship, the coming and going of relationship, where, I'm even more drawn to you. I miss you even more. You're even larger in my heart because of your absence. And I'm really glad to see you when you return. And my love for you is even enlarged because you're gone. And, when you think about death, there is, this has to have some kernel of truth, because otherwise death would, and that's the ultimate absence, right? The ultimate absence is, we know as Christians, death doesn't have the final say. Mm-hmm. And so David going away for a weekend or whatever, and my heart is drawn toward him, the fruit of his absence is there's more love. And likewise with death, the fruit of death is life. When Jesus came, Jesus conquered death. Mm-hmm. And because of death, because of his conquering death, the fruit of death, where's your sting? It's life, eternal life. Haven't worked all that out in my head yet, but I was thinking about, again, we're talking about the Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of Eden. And so Eve is away from Adam's side. And so was God not present too? Did God leave Eve's side too? Where was God? We focus on the story, and the writer of the Genesis story, the book, was really just trying to explain the genesis of sin. And so we don't get all the details, but wow, there's so much for us to wrestle with and to understand about that whole process right at the beginning.
Well, that makes sense in the light, honey, of God having to respect the freedom of choice that he gave Adam and Eve, that he had to leave them in a sense free to make their decision about whether they were going to obey or not obey. In other words, faith has to be tested. Yeah. And he allowed the test
Yeah.
to see what they would do.
Yeah. Fresh bread right here. Fresh bread.
Yes. Yes. And we know that from a human perspective, he was not present, but from a perspective of the godliness, God is omnipresent. Right. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it from that perspective. I think when we get closer to God, we understand that in the heart, the person, and I think that's a part of grieving, to realize that they're dead, but they will always be a part of you if you allow in your heart. And so they will always be present with you in your heart. From that perspective, they'll always be with you, with your memories and things of that nature. Now, and also I love what you both are doing in that. Yes, it's important to respect people. It's important to recognize that they do have titles and degrees, but sometimes these things actually can separate us. It can make people feel like, well, you're there and I'm here. I can't relate to you. And so you've shared your stories to show that, guess what? We once were, and it's because of God that we are, but we are still in the process. And guess what? It doesn't, the thing is, some people will be listening and they don't have the exact same experiences that you do. Each of you don't have the same experiences, but guess what? We all are in a work in progress. We all are on a journey. And we all, by the grace of God, are being changed. And we all have not arrived. And if there's anyone who's listening and you really think that you have arrived, and then you're thinking that you have become God. And so no, none of us have actually arrived to where we need to be. And actually, when we do become what we need to become, we will realize that we are sons and daughters of God, created in his image, and we would never be him in either event, because he's God. And we are who we are, and we are who we were created to be, and are becoming that exactly. So I thank you for removing that distance that maybe some people might have been listening and say, oh, they're doctoral degrees. Oh, well, I can't relate to them. So I'm glad that you did state and share with us what God has done for you and what he is still doing through you and in you as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, the article about the gospel entitled The Gospel and Mental Health. You stated in that article that sin created a new mental norm in the human race. And you've mentioned some of that. If there's anything that you've left out, the new mental norm, how were Adam and Eve different from us, the way that we are now? What did sin do? How did it do it? And you did mention some already, but if there's anything that you haven't mentioned, please share that.
Well, I think I could say a couple more things. One of the things that we know that fear and shame do, and I mentioned disconnection, but in terms of the brain, a lot of mental illness is because of chemical imbalances that are in the brain. Again, God created the brain perfectly balanced with all the chemicals that were needed for healthy brain function. But through sin, there has been a disconnection from the brain. Some people describe the brain as having a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere, if we use that analogy, is connected with the ability to feel, the ability to be creative, the ability to laugh and have joy, kind of that spiritual part of ourselves. Whereas the left brain is more the linear, logical, reasoning, rational part of our brain. And one of the things that happens with trauma is that the feeling brain, the organ of the brain that's most commonly talked about is the amygdala of the brain. The amygdala is where our feelings of trauma are stored. That's where the panic, where the fear is there and is like, oh no, what's going to happen here? And so those feelings are there in that part of the brain. And often what happens is when we get triggered, even now, that amygdala responds as if the original trauma had happened, and it brings the original trauma into the present. And I respond in the present as if it were, if that person were the enemy, or that same thing was going to happen. And so that's something that is really important in understanding trauma and mental illness today. And how do you bring a person who has been triggered to begin to manage their emotions again and bring the prefrontal cortex, that left brain back into in charge, instead of letting the feelings and the emotions determine our behavior. And so that is a way that I believe that sin has affected our brains, and trauma, the way we experience it today, it's manifested in our unhealthy brains.
Right, and I would also add that another way of looking at the brain is from the top down, and there's a legitimate left to right, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, but also we think of it in terms of the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex, and then the midbrain, and then the brain stem. And the amygdala sounds the alarm, and the hippocampus stores the memory. Hippocampus tries to lay down or to slow down the amygdala. The amygdala says there's danger when there is no danger. And the hippocampus, again, all part of the midbrain, can't settle the amygdala down. It kicks the prefrontal cortex offline, and so we can't think. And when you're really upset, when your emotional brain is in charge, next to your prefrontal cortex is the language center of the brain, and the language center is also kicked offline. And so, can you imagine this disintegration that happens that happened to Eve in the garden? That didn't happen just, it doesn't just happen for us, but it also happened to her. I'm sure we devolved and it's much worse, but that disintegration that happened for her was serious too. And likewise with Adam. And so the ability for the left brain and the right brain, there's some connections that take place, left brain, right brain, as well as from the top down, from the neocortex to the midbrain and the brainstem. So the amygdala says there's danger and there is no shutting it down, and it sends messages to the brainstem and says there's danger, your heart rate is elevated, you start breathing heavy, and you get your muscles tighten up, your circulation shuts down, there's danger. And again, that could be, I'm thinking about the danger, that's anxiety, I'm thinking about it, and I get fearful, and all of that is happening. That happened to Adam and Eve. We don't think about that, but it happened to them as well. And so even if you understand that, it happened, and in their anxiety, what they did was they sewed fig leaves together. And the question we often ask in a more, as we walk people through this, what do you do in order to survive, in order to make sense of your life? What are some things that you do that when your anxiety gets high, how do you try to manage your anxiety to bring it down? Oftentimes we want to pass it on to someone else. And an example of that would be the boss hollers at David. David comes home and hollers at me, and I turn and holler at the kids, and the kids go and kick the dog. Now, in that example, David has transferred his anxiety to me. I've transferred my anxiety to the kids, and the kids to the dog. And that's what we do. And if David is unaware that he is doing that, he brings it home, and suddenly I become aware and say, oh, that's David's anxiety. I don't have to do anything with it. It doesn't have to trigger my anxiety. That's a real healthy thing to do. And so I don't have to holler at the kids. And then, of course, the kids won't kick the dog. And so Eve got really anxious because the snake said that God was really unfair. He didn't give her everything he promised. And she took and dumped that anxiety on to Adam, and Adam took it. And so that happened right in the Garden of Gethsemane. And again, we don't think about that. We just read the story very simplistically. But when you think about it from a neuroscience point of view, really what we know now, put that back in the story with that shame, guilt, fear, anxiety that happened even in the garden.
Very similarly, just another way that we do that is we say, how many times have you heard, you made me feel? What are we doing when we say, you made me feel?
You're blaming me.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to dump my anxiety about what happened onto you. You did it. You're responsible for my anxiety or my anger or whatever my emotional reaction is, instead of taking responsibility for my own feelings, which are mine, not yours.
Yes.
But we do that.
Mm-hmm. And so the question we can ask, and we do ask our clients, what have you done in order to try to make sense out of your life? What fig leaves have you sewn together to try to hide your nakedness, to hide your shame?
And there must have been a drastic change, because when we see that Adam, when he found out what Eve had done, the Bible says that Eve was deceived, Adam was not. He knew that the enemy had gotten to her, had used her, the one that God had warned them about. He knew it. But guess what? He was willing. He wasn't hungry. He didn't, that it wasn't about, I'm hungry, I need to eat this food. He wanted to be with Eve. He wanted to, if she's going to go down, I'm going down. And guess what? After he ate the fruit, how much was it later that he's there telling God, well, the woman, this woman that you just were all in it with, and if she goes down, I'm going down, do you see how that change took place in the Garden of Eden? And so, it's just amazing the change. And we're how many generations after that? So you can imagine what a mess we are if that change, that drastic change had already taken place back then. But praise God, you know what? We're starting to understand, and there is help and there's hope that's on the way.